No records name his parents. No census ever logged his birth. The man who would come to be known as Malcador the Sigillite simply was, older than empires, weathered as Terra's own mountains, a wraith who walked beside humanity for millennia. When he first emerged into the chronicles of the Imperium, he claimed to have lived more than 6,000 years. Some say he was even older, having watched the rise and fall of forgotten kingdoms during Old Night. And yet he appeared as nothing more than a hunched, robed man with parchment-thin skin and a voice like whispered parchment, soft, aged, certain. He called himself a Sigillite, a keeper of hidden truths. But that word held little meaning to the warlords and scholars of Terra in those days. What mattered was that he came bearing secrets, lost languages, ancient sciences, coded glyphs etched in copper that hummed with dormant energy. He understood things others feared, and he spoke as if he had known the world before it lost its name. In the age of strife, knowledge was a curse. Entire cities burned to keep old truths buried, but Malcador preserved them. He was the last of his kind, the final steward of an order so secretive that even its name had been scrubbed from the lexicons. These Sigillites, it is whispered, had walked alongside the first men who had harnessed the warp, who had built the first void engines and summoned gods from the cold stars. They had vanished into their libraries when the world caught fire. Malcador, alone among them, chose to return. He never spoke of why. He first drew attention in the dying years of the Unification Wars, when the warlords of Terra still slaughtered each other over rusted thrones and mutant chieftains. Cities rose and fell in days. Psychers burned through their own minds in seconds. Amid this chaos, a new warlord strode the earth, clad in golden armor and wielding lightning. The Emperor of mankind. He did not conquer for power, but for order, for unity. And it was to this man that Malcador offered his service, not with bowed head, but with quiet knowing. "Do you know what you are?" Malcador is said to have asked the Emperor upon their first meeting. The Golden Warlord regarded him in silence. "You are not here to rule," Malcador continued. "You are here to finish what others began, and I can help you do it." The Emperor did not strike him down for his audacity. He did not mock him. Instead, he accepted. It was the beginning of a partnership that would shape the fate of all humanity. From that moment, the shadowed man in gray became the right hand of a god. Malcador's gifts were not strength or spectacle, but precision. He moved through the newborn Imperium like ink through water, subtle, staining every corner with his influence. While the Emperor marched with thunder warriors to crush techno-barbarians and wipe the slate of Terra clean, Malcador whispered into the ears of philosophers and scribes. He catalogued what could be saved. He identified what must be erased. Knowledge, not just blood, was the price of unity. He became the voice of the Emperor when the Emperor could not speak. His authority was absolute but never proclaimed. He did not need to shout. When Malcador entered a chamber, even the most bellicose warlords grew still. They sensed something immense behind those rheumy eyes. An intellect sharpened over centuries, a presence that bent the warp around it. He carried a staff carved with ancient symbols, predating even the dark age of technology. It was not a weapon, yet few dared stand near it. Psychers flinched when he passed, and even custodians afforded him space. He was no astartes, no demigod, just a man. But a man the Emperor trusted with secrets that would burn the minds of others. They say he had once walked the void, that he had seen the stars before they went dark, that he knew what lay buried in Mars, in Saturn, in the hidden vaults beneath Luna. He spoke languages that no longer existed and remembered histories that had never been written. Some custodians joked that Malcador had been old when the Emperor was young, but Malcador never joked. Not truly. To the public, he was the High Administrator, the keeper of imperial records, the First Lord of Terra. But those were masks, titles that meant little beside the truth. Malcador was the Emperor's conscience, his tether, the only man who dared to disagree with him and still be heard. He was not infallible. He admitted as much to those few close enough to see past the robes. He feared the Primarchs, not their strength, but their potential. He worried about ambition, about the things that could not be taught or reasoned with. The Emperor called him cautious. Malcador called himself realistic. And he watched, always. He watched as the Thunder Warriors were retired, as the Primarchs were scattered, as Terra bent beneath the weight of a dream no one yet understood. He watched and advised, never flinching, never raising his voice. Others built legions and forged weapons. Malcador built infrastructure, ideology, institutions. He designed the systems that would hold the Imperium together once the Emperor left to conquer the stars. Those systems would be tested, cracked, shattered, but that was still to come. At the dawn of the Great Crusade, Malcador was already ancient. He should have been dust, long forgotten, a footnote in the Emperor's rise. And yet he endured. Not through strength, not through sorcery, but sheer conviction. No ritual sustained him, no relic preserved him. Just purpose, just duty. It is said that when asked how he had lived so long, he replied, "I have a task. I will not die until it is done." He never told anyone what that task truly was. But the Emperor knew, and that was enough. Long before the heresy, long before the Golden Throne, before Titan and the Inquisition and the ashes on the floor, there was only a robed man stepping out of the dark, offering his hand to a god. Not as a servant, not as a soldier, but as a partner, as a brother, as the last Sigillite. It began with a whisper, not a war cry. The world bled beneath its fractured skies. Terra, before unity, was not one world. It was a graveyard of empires. 1,000 kingdoms of ash clung to survival among radiation storms and mutant warlords, each jealously guarding their scrap of soil, their gods, their lies. Among the black sands of Pan-Pacific wastes and the twisted hives of Ursh, humanity had become a species scattered by ignorance, made savage by fear. And through that chaos walked a golden giant, towering, serene, impossibly ancient. He did not scream his conquests, he merely arrived, with words that seared away superstition, with warriors that crushed tyrants beneath their boots. The Emperor had begun his long campaign of unification. His eyes were always forward, yet even he knew the cost of ruling would not be paid by force alone. That was when Malcador spoke. The story is not told in the grand archives. It is not recited by the ministorum choirs or etched into the marble halls of the administratum. But in the dark chambers of the Librarius Occultus, whispered from remembrancer to remembrancer, there remains a tale of 2 men atop the ruins of the Himalayan plateau, one crowned in gold, the other cloaked in gray. "You cannot rule with lightning forever," Malcador said. The Emperor did not reply. Not at first. He simply stood beside the fallen spires of the former technocrat kingdom of Halderon, where cybernetica monstrosities had once held cities hostage for tribute. The Thunder Warriors still roamed the lower levels, mopping up resistance with brutal efficiency. "I do not intend to," the Emperor finally answered. Malcador nodded. "Then you'll need something more enduring than thunder. You'll need ink, laws, vision that survives after your hands are no longer here to shape the clay." It was not flattery. The Sigillite did not flatter. He observed. That conversation would mark the beginning of the true transformation of conquest into governance. For while the Emperor had forged the fire, it was Malcador who would shape the mold. From that day forward, Malcador was at the Emperor's side, not as a general, not as a servant, but as something else, an advisor, Yes, but more. A historian with the future in mind. A man who could see that power alone was not enough, that without memory, without structure, the Imperium would rot from within. In the months that followed, Malcador traveled not with legions, but alone or with only a few adepts. He entered shattered hives where knowledge had been banned for centuries and reclaimed libraries from beneath fungal overgrowth. He recovered tomes written in Proto-Gothic, recorded the customs of mutant tribes before they were wiped out, and documented the extinct languages of the Arkan Basins before their speakers were silenced forever. He did not do this for nostalgia. He did it because he understood the Emperor's goal, not to burn the past, but to redeem it, to preserve what was wise and cast out only the madness. At the Emperor's behest, he became emissary to the few allies who could not be defeated by force. It was Malcador who negotiated with the tech priests of Mars, speaking their language of symbols and logic when no other Terran could. It was Malcador who met with the navigators of House Belisarius and brokered their loyalty, offering them stability in exchange for secrecy and loyalty to the Golden Throne. Where the Thunder Warriors brought compliance, Malcador brought integration. That trust did not come easily. Many warlords mistook him for a cleric or a senile old man and tried to disrespect him. One story, almost certainly true, tells of the despot of Euralis who laughed when Malcador entered his audience chamber unarmed, dismissing him as a shriveled ghost with a stick. When the guards reached for Malcador, they were flung across the chamber by an invisible force that shattered their bones with a sickening crunch. The despot tried to flee but found his legs frozen in place, his mind filled with images of every atrocity he had ever committed, relived in perfect clarity. Malcador stood unmoved. "Your shame," he said calmly, "will be your judgment." The despot surrendered the next morning. But it was not fear that made Malcador valuable. It was his memory. His ability to hold 1,000 things in his mind at once and discern the single thread that must be pulled. The Emperor often described him as a lighthouse, a constant point amid a storm of change. Yet even Malcador was not immune to despair. During the campaign against the tech savant conclaves of Nordafric, Malcador witnessed an entire population, over 10 million souls, fed into an auto factory's recycling systems to fuel a weapons assembly line. He stood in silence as the Emperor watched impassively. When they were alone, he asked, "Is this what must be done to unify man?" The Emperor replied, "It is not what I desire, but it is what is required." Malcador said nothing more, but from that moment he began recording his personal journals, not for the present, for the future, for the day when someone would need to understand why choices had been made, choices that would haunt the Imperium forever. Among the Thunder Warriors, many feared Malcador. They said he could kill with a word, erase memories with a thought. Some claimed he walked through walls or spoke to spirits. But the truth was more terrifying. He simply knew too much about them, about their origins, about what they were destined for. He bore it in silence. And when the Thunder Warriors were deemed obsolete, replaced by a new generation of warriors, more stable, more perfect, Malcador did not protest. But he watched as they were led to their deaths, watched as their records were scrubbed, watched as the Emperor turned the page. This was the price of progress. Malcador paid it with his silence. He never forgave it, but he accepted it. In the years that followed, he would begin to shape what would become the Adeptus Administratum, the web of law and order that would hold the Imperium together. He drafted the first civil codes, the first imperial decrees that stretched beyond the battlefield. He designed the networks of scribes and adepts that would, in time, grow into billions. And always he kept a portion of his time for the Emperor, not just to serve, but to question, to challenge. The Emperor welcomed it. Where others saw only divinity, Malcador saw a man with a vision so vast it could not afford to blink. "Do you trust me?" he asked the Emperor once, as they looked down upon the burning fields of Chem Siberica. The Emperor did not hesitate. "More than any of my sons." And that was the quiet truth. The Thunder Warriors burned, the legions had yet to be found, and the stars were still beyond reach. But two men stood at the heart of it all, a god in gold and a ghost in gray. One would lead, the other would make sure there was a path left to walk. The Unification Wars did not end in a single battle or even a single decade. They ended in silence, a silence bought with iron and fire, the stillness of ash settling on the bones of a dead world. Across Terra, the techno-barbarian tyrants were gone. Their strongholds had been shattered beneath orbital bombardment, their bioengineered horrors reduced to cinders, their names scrubbed from the records by decree. But that was only the beginning. Victory in war is a simple thing, ugly, brutal, final. Victory in peace is harder. It's slower. It requires patience, vision, and the ability to shape 1,000 futures out of the wreckage of the past. And as the Emperor turned his gaze toward the stars, it was left to one man to turn that pile of broken thrones into an empire. Malcador the Sigillite. Where once he had walked in the shadow of the Emperor as an advisor and steward, he now stood in the full weight of the sun. The Emperor had entrusted him with the most delicate task of all, to make Terra governable. The world was a graveyard. Cities had been turned to powder, oceans irradiated, whole continents depopulated. Malcador surveyed it all from the stone balconies of what would become the Imperial Palace, a site that, only years prior, had been the hidden fortress of the Sigillites, his ancient order. Now it was the foundation of something new, something impossible. And he knew exactly where to begin. Administration. Not armies, not symbols or cathedrals, spreadsheets, ledgers, infrastructure, people. Malcador summoned survivors, not warriors but scribes, planners, guildmasters, gene coders, cultural scholars. The remnants of the ancient Eurasian collectivist states, the last free enclaves of Pan-Afric techno-guilds, even a few surviving units of rogue Mechanicum tech priests who had not pledged to Mars. These were people who understood systems, not swords. He did not ask them to worship, he asked them to build. From them he forged the protoform of what would become the Adeptus Administratum, the beating heart of the Imperium's bureaucracy. Each department was assigned not by bloodline or title, but by demonstrated capacity. Malcador was ruthless in his selections. He burned through 10,000 candidates to find 10 who could actually do the work. He did not care for loyalty, he cared for competence. And when those 10 proved themselves, he trusted them, gave them authority, gave them responsibility, and watched. To some, it seemed a strange choice. Why not elevate nobles or former warlords who had bent the knee? Why not reward those who had bled for unity? Because, Malcador understood, blood could only buy the future if someone had the sense to hold it in a cup. He did not stop at governance. He turned his eye to the very fabric of Terran society. He knew that unity enforced at gunpoint would never last. It had to be ingrained in the bones of the people. So he built an education network, small at first, a series of skolams scattered across reclaimed hives. Children who had grown up gnawing protein gruel in the shadow of radiation towers were given books, languages, mathematics. They were taught about the stars. Not the stars of myth or of gods, but the real stars. Distant systems with worlds they would one day walk upon. Let them believe in tomorrow, he said once to a subordinate, even if they do not survive today. He oversaw the reclamation of Terran culture too, what was left of it. When the Ministorum later declared the old world heretical, they quietly forgot who had salvaged its bones. It was Malcador who ordered that the Mona Lisa be retrieved from the collapsed vaults beneath the Atlantic Arcology. It was Malcador who secured the shattered remains of Da Vinci's Vitruvian Man from an auction held by a criminal data cartel in former Neo-Africa. It was Malcador who had the last recording of Bach's Mass in B minor digitally reconstructed from a cracked crystal drive recovered from the ruins of Vanaheim Spire. He wasn't preserving them out of nostalgia. He was making a point. Humanity mattered, not just its strength, its mind, its memory. And so, for the first time in centuries, art was displayed in public again, not for pleasure, for purpose. To remind the people that they had not always lived like this, that they didn't have to. But while Malcador worked to rebuild Terra's soul, he did not neglect its security. With the Thunder Warriors now retired, some say exterminated, Malcador turned his gaze to new defenses. The Astartes legions were still nascent, most not yet reunited with their gene fathers. So Malcador did what Malcador always did. He improvised. He reactivated the Custodes' administrative wings, using their unmatched discipline and loyalty to enforce law across the core sectors, not as soldiers, as judges. Some cities received robed orators with golden spears who would hold public trials for known collaborators and slavers. The message was clear. Unity brought peace, but it would not tolerate exploitation. The Emperor's justice would be patient, but it would be precise. Malcador also created a position that did not exist before him, First Lord of Terra. He did not crown himself. There was no ceremony, no statue raised. But when the Emperor departed Terra to begin the Great Crusade, it was Malcador who held the scepter. To all adepts and generals across the throne world, his word was as binding as the Emperor's. Because he understood, without structure, without enforcement, all the sacrifice of unification would be undone in months. He kept his office simple, a single desk, a single globe of Terra, a chair no one else sat in. He wore the same gray robes every day, and when questioned why he never appeared in golden regalia like the Emperor's, he replied, "The sun needs a shadow to define its light. I am that shadow." Not all accepted his authority. More than one rogue general attempted to carve their own fiefdom after the Emperor's departure. Most were dealt with through diplomacy, negotiation, restructuring. A few required more final solutions. One, a former warlord of Ursh who had pledged loyalty and then violated peace accords by enslaving the techno-nomads of the southern wastes, was brought before Malcador personally. The warlord expected a public trial. He received 5 minutes of silence. Then Malcador raised his hand. The warlord collapsed to the floor, screaming. Blood poured from his eyes and nose. His mind, tampered with, altered, turned inside out, was left blank. Not dead, just gone. Malcador looked at the guards and said, "Find someone more capable." They did. The warlord's capital city fell in line within days, and so slowly the noise quieted. The rebellions ceased. The cities began to heal. The unification of Terra was complete. But there was no parade for Malcador, no murals, no great choruses in his name. Just silence. The silence he had worked for. He returned to his office one morning to find a single note left by the Emperor, penned in his own hand. It read, "You have done what I could not. You have made Terra ready for forever." Malcador didn't smile. He didn't cry. He folded the note, placed it inside a sealed compartment in his staff, and returned to work. Because tomorrow the stars would call, and someone would have to keep the lights on at home. There are moments in history that echo louder than gunfire. No ships fell from orbit, no cities burned, no legion turned its blades against another, not yet. And yet, on the icy world of Nicaea, the future of the Imperium was altered forever by words spoken in judgment. It began, as these things often do, with questions. Whispers, really. Whispers from the battlefields of the Great Crusade. Whispers from within the legions. Whispers that reached the halls of terror, wrapped in the scent of ozone and the subtle dread of something ancient stirring. Psychers. The legions had embraced them. Not all, but many. Entire companies had been formed around librarians, warriors who wielded the warp, not just with bolters, but with their minds. They could blind a foe with thought, scorch armored columns with a word, halt a tyrant's heart with a stare. Some saw them as the next step in human evolution. Others saw them as heresy given flesh. And at the center of it all stood Malcador. He had known this day would come. When he first stepped into the vaults of the Sigillites centuries ago, he had read of psychers who shattered planets, of warp entities that fed on minds. He had seen what lay behind the veil, and he knew psychic power was not a gift. It was a burden, a fire that could illuminate or consume. The Emperor, too, understood this. He had created the Librarius program with deliberate caution, allowing the legions to explore the potential of psychic warfare, but never without limits. Malcador had overseen its earliest designs, its structure, its training doctrines. He knew every librarian by name, every legion's approach, every failure, and every triumph. But not all victories come without a cost. Magnus the Red, Primarch of the Thousand Suns, had taken to the Librarius as if it were his birthright. And perhaps it was. His legion had not merely used psychic power, they had lived it, built their culture around it, molded their doctrines to embrace the warp as a tool, a weapon, a library of infinite truths. Magnus did not fear it. He revered it. That reverence, Malcador feared, might be the death of them all. Reports began to accumulate. Strange phenomena on battlefields where Thousand Suns fought. Signs and sigils left in places no eye could see. Dreams spreading through allied legions like infection. And worse, accusations. Mortarion of the Death Guard had long despised the Psyker's touch. Leman Russ of the Space Wolves had seen firsthand what sorcery could do. Others remained silent, uncertain, watching the balance shift. Then came the petition, from Russia, from Mortarion, from Rogel Dorn, demanding the Emperor take a side. So he did. The summons went out across the stars. All Primarchs, all senior Legion representatives, senior remembrancers, scholars, Imperial dignitaries, and the High Lords of Terra were to gather at the Nicaean Amphitheater, carved from the planet's mountain face. It would be a council, the greatest of its kind. A decision would be made, not on conquest, but on belief. And when the great amphitheater was built and filled with voices, sons of gods, sons of men, philosophers and killers alike, it was Malcador who walked the central floor. He carried the Emperor's staff, not the blade of a custodian or the sigil of a Primarch, but the symbol of authority forged from reason. The Emperor did not preside. He watched high above the throng, silent in thought. Malcador spoke in his stead. His voice did not echo. It settled. Even the Legion Astartes went still as he raised one hand. This council convenes not for condemnation, he said, but for clarity. He did not open with accusations. He did not name names. Instead, he asked a question. What do we mean to become? For 2 days, the council raged. Magnus spoke with fire, eloquence, and terrible certainty. He cited victories won by mind alone, tyrants undone by truth, worlds saved by knowledge gleaned from beyond the veil. To deny psychic power, he argued, was to deny the soul of humanity's future. Mortarion answered with scars. He told of worlds tainted by demonic possession, of librarians who lost themselves and turned on their brothers mid-battle, of civilizations shattered not by enemy blades, but by human minds opened too wide. Malcador said little. He listened. He watched Lorgar's silence with unease. He saw the glint of something unreadable in Fulgrim's eyes. He watched Vulcan cross his arms, Sanguinius furrow his brow, Perturabo scowl with calculated indifference. Guilliman, ever the diplomat, tried to forge a compromise. Angron laughed at the entire affair. And then, on the third day, Malcador stood again. He did not deliver judgment. He simply spoke. He told a story of a psyker he had known long ago, before the Imperium, a boy who could see echoes of futures not yet written. He had been kind, gentle, gifted beyond comprehension. He had used his powers to help, to heal, to teach, until the warp opened in him and tore a hole through reality that swallowed 3 cities. He did not say the boy's name. He did not need to. He meant well, Malcador said quietly. They all do. When he stepped back, silence fell like dust on stone. The Emperor rose, and the verdict was given. The Librarius was to be dissolved. All psychers removed from the legions, their powers forbidden. Only the Emperor himself would be permitted to wield the warp without oversight. Malcador did not smile. He did not sigh. He simply nodded. He knew what it meant, that the Imperium would face the future without a sword it might one day need, that the astartes who could withstand the warp's temptations would now walk blind. But he also knew the cost of delay, of compromise, of trusting too much in powers no man, not even a Primarch, could truly master. As the amphitheater emptied, he remained seated. Magnus passed him without a word. Leman Russ offered him a nod, and in the cold wind of Nicaea, Malcador felt a chill deeper than the snow. He had won, and they had all lost something precious. Not because the choice was wrong, but because no choice would have been right. In his private journal, Malcador wrote only one line that night. "We have bought time, but not peace." It began not with a declaration, but with an absence. Across the stars, the thunder of the Great Crusade echoed in triumph. 1,000 banners were raised on 1,000 worlds, each bearing the double-headed eagle of mankind. The legions, reborn in the image of their rediscovered Primarchs, carved a path of order through the anarchy of the galaxy. Alien empires fell, human enclaves were uplifted. Worlds long lost to myth now bore the mark of imperial compliance. And through it all, the Emperor of mankind remained distant. He had returned to Terra. No speech explained his withdrawal. No edict was issued. He simply left the front lines and retreated to the throne world he had once unified with his own hand. Many assumed it was a temporary absence, a season of respite, or a stage in a larger plan. But as months turned to years, and the Emperor did not return, questions grew. And the one man who held the answers remained silent: Malcador. The Sigillite did not offer comfort. He did not provide platitudes. He did not give speeches to soothe the pride of the Primarchs, who now commanded their legions without the direct gaze of their father. What he gave was structure, clarity, orders. To some, that was enough. To others, it was treason in all but name. The Council of Terra had been born in the Emperor's absence, created as a civilian body to help govern the increasingly complex sprawl of the Imperium. It was staffed by bureaucrats, logisticians, planetary governors, men and women who knew little of war but much of administration. Malcador had appointed them with surgical precision, balancing ambition against experience, allegiance against usefulness. It was practical, efficient, and it enraged the Primarchs. The likes of Lorgar, Angron, Perturabo. They did not take kindly to being told that their victories on the field were now subject to audits and resource allocations managed by mortals. Even Guilliman, ever the rational statesman, voiced concern that the council was growing too powerful too quickly. And behind it all, stood Malcador. To many, he was merely a robed scribe with a psychic staff and a weary smile. But to those who truly understood the machinery of the Imperium, he was the architect of everything. It was Malcador who approved the tithe structures that starved rebellious worlds into compliance without a single bolt round fired. It was Malcador who codified the rights of planetary governors to levy planetary militias, granting them a stake in their own survival. It was Malcador who set in motion the reformation of the Imperial Court into a lattice of overlapping authorities, each answerable not to a single warlord, but to the dream of unity itself. In doing so, he created a system that could survive the Emperor's absence, and for that, many never forgave him. But the greatest secret of all was buried deep beneath the Imperial Palace, where no Primarch had ever been invited to tread. The Webway. A myth among most, a theory among the learned, a warning among the ancient. The Emperor had not returned to Terra for rest or political intrigue. He had returned to labor, to build a future beyond the warp, a secret portal network that would span the galaxy without relying on the unpredictable tides of the Imperium, a way to shield mankind from the corrupting touch of chaos forever. But something went wrong. Only Malcador knew the full extent of the disaster. When Magnus the Red, in his desperation to warn the Emperor of Horus's fall, tore open reality with his psychic scream, the Webway tore with it. A rent in the veil allowed demons to flood the Emperor's construction site, a catastrophe that forced the Master of Mankind to bind himself to the Golden Throne, not as ruler, but as prison warden. Malcador watched it happen, watched the Emperor's light dim, not from defeat, but from self-sacrifice. From that moment forward, the Emperor could no longer lead, he could only contain. And Malcador, he became the face of authority. He did not want it. In the quiet of his chambers, beyond the view of any servant or warrior, he would sit by the map globe of Terra and stare at its slowly turning surface. Not in pride, in mourning. He had given the Emperor his counsel for centuries, had watched him triumph across a broken earth, outwit monsters in flesh and steel alike, and tame the tides of war. But now the Emperor was no longer among them. His voice came only through brief psychic flickers. His presence was confined to the throne. And so Malcador did what only he could do. He acted. He met with Dorn in private, instructing him to prepare Terra's defenses, not in years, but now. He convened covert networks, recalling ancient Sigillite agents to gather intelligence on the shifting loyalties of the legions. He reached out to the librarians quietly disbanded after Nicaea, watching which ones still practiced their art in secret. He said nothing. He made no arrests. He simply noted. He prepared contingencies, not because he foresaw the full scope of the heresy, but because Malcador always planned for what others refused to imagine. When emissaries from Mars grew restless at the Emperor's silence, Malcador met them in the hall of the Omnissiah, alone, without bodyguards. He explained that the work below the palace required isolation, required stillness, and above all, required faith. Most accepted it. Some did not. They disappeared. And all the while, the Astronomicon began to flicker. Subtle at first, brief outages, warp ships that took longer to return, navigator reports growing erratic. Then entire sectors went dark. Malcador sat in council with the astropaths. He listened to their babbling, the blood running from their eyes, the gibbering horrors they screamed in their sleep. He said nothing, but that night he summoned the Silent Sisters. In force, he did not share the Emperor's vision. Not entirely. He was not a god. He was not even a warrior. But he was something perhaps more terrifying. He was prepared. When the first word came from the fringes that a Death Guard vessel had fired upon its own, Malcador had already cleared the upper levels of the Librarius Tower. When another said that the sons of Horus had annihilated loyalist forces during a routine compliance campaign, he quietly cancelled all diplomatic missions beyond Segmentum Solar. And when a battered vessel limped into orbit, carrying a single wounded astartes, Nathaniel Garrow, Malcador met him himself. He listened to Garrow's words, listened to the tale of betrayal, of Istvan, of virus bombs, of slaughter, of Horus. Malcador's face did not change. He placed a hand on Garrow's shoulder, and for the first time in decades he prayed, not to a god, to the Emperor, not for salvation but for permission, permission to do what must be done. The stars themselves seemed to flicker. In the dark silence of the void, Terra waited, blind, deaf, cut off. The warp storms that had once been rare tempests were now constant, bloated and violent, stirred by an unseen hand. Even the Astronomicon, the Emperor's great beacon of psychic might, pulsed with uncertainty. For months, the solar system received no transmissions from the outer legions, no reports, no calls for resupply, no news, only static, only dread. And then the Eisenstein arrived, a battered frigate not expected, not invited, not welcome. Its hull was scarred with melt impacts and boarding damage. Its machine spirits howled in agony as it crossed into the system under emergency codes that hadn't been used since the Age of Strife. The Imperial Fists, guardians of Terra under Rogel Dorn, were the first to respond. Their ships moved into intercept position with practiced efficiency, targeting solutions acquired, boarding parties armed. They were ready to annihilate the intruder if it so much as twitched in the wrong direction. But the Eisenstein did not fire. It crawled, limped, like a wounded beast returning to the place of its birth to die. Dorn sent word to the Imperial Palace, to the one man who would know what this meant before the rest of Terra even guessed. Malcador the Sigillite. The Sigillite did not order the ship destroyed. He did not even flinch. He simply nodded, summoned the Sisters of Silence, and ordered a delegation of custodians to accompany him to the moon, Luna. There, in a fortified installation built into the bones of the ancient regolith, Malcador watched as the survivors of the Eisenstein were brought into containment. Not prison, containment, isolated, scrubbed, observed. They were not just refugees, they were evidence. Their presence could mean salvation or damnation, and they knew it. Captain Nathaniel Garrow of the Death Guard walked ahead of the others, his armor blackened, his face gaunt. Behind him came men who had once borne the colors of the sons of Horus, the Emperor's children, even a few scattered remembrancers who had somehow survived what should have killed them 10 times over. They were loyal. They had fled Istvan. Malcador listened in silence as Garrow gave his report. No interruptions, no questions, just that blank, unreadable stare. A man processing not just facts, but consequences. Horus had turned. Lupercal, the chosen war master, had raised his hand against the Imperium. The massacre on Istvan III was not an accident. It was a purge. Loyalist space marines, men who had fought beside their brothers since the beginning of the crusade, were exterminated without hesitation. Virus bombs, orbital strikes, close-quarter betrayal, a red tide meant to cleanse the legions of those who would not kneel to Horus. Garrow described it all, in detail, without embellishment. And when he was done, Malcador simply asked, "Do you still serve the Emperor?" Garrow did not hesitate. "Yes." Malcador nodded once and in that moment made a decision that would alter the course of history. He ordered the ship sealed. The survivors were to remain in isolation, not as prisoners but as potential foundations, keystones. What they represented was far more important than what they had done. They had chosen loyalty not out of convenience or command, but out of conviction. That made them dangerous and precious. Garrow was the first, the prototype, the proof that even in the heart of corruption, loyalty could endure. Malcador spoke with him in the days that followed, not as an interrogator, but as a recruiter. "You are not broken," he told Garrow. "You are tempered, like a blade drawn from fire." The Death Guard captain did not understand. Not at first, but Malcador was not in the habit of explaining himself. He had work to do. The Emperor remained bound to the Golden Throne, sustaining the Webway project and keeping demons at bay. The burden had already begun to erode his strength. Every day he endured was a day Malcador had to act with more speed, more certainty. There could be no delays. He summoned Rogel Dorn, Sanguinius, Jagatai Khan, those Primarchs who remained untouched by whispers of betrayal. He told them of the Eisenstein. He told them what Garrow had revealed, and he told them to prepare. Dorn wept, quietly like a stone cracking. He had believed in Horus, had loved him like a brother. Sanguinius said nothing. He already suspected the storm was coming. The Khan laughed, a short, humorless sound. "Finally," he said, "the masks fall." Malcador gave them their tasks. The palace must be fortified, the inner walls reinforced, the orbital network hardened. Every supply line, every garrison, every last cog in the machinery of the Imperium must be checked and rechecked. Terra would become a fortress because the heresy had begun. And that word was never spoken aloud. Not yet. Not even among the Primarchs. But they all knew what it was, a betrayal beyond comprehension. Malcador returned to his private sanctum beneath the palace, the same one that had once housed the arcane relics of the Sigillites. There, surrounded by fragments of lost civilizations and forgotten truths, he opened a drawer. Inside it lay a list, names, men and women scattered across the galaxy, some warriors, some psychers, some mere administrators or scholars. All of them had one thing in common: conviction. They would be needed. He began to send the calls. To Garrow, "You will find the others." To the Silent Sisters, "You will bind what must not be unbound." To his agents on Mars, on Luna, even in the deeper vaults of the palace itself, "Watch. Listen. Do not act. Yet." The Eisenstein's arrival had not just been a warning, it had been a signal. The long night was beginning, and while the Emperor held the gate beneath reality, it was Malcador who would hold the line in the world of men. He would do it without glory, without armies, with only knowledge and will. The same tools he had always used, the only ones that ever mattered, and the only ones that in the end might save them all. The echo of the Eisenstein's engines had barely faded before Malcador moved again, not with armies, not with declarations, but with whispers. Across the burning stars of the Imperium, a second war began. Not one of bolter fire and siege engines, but of decisions made in shadows. A war waged by oaths, not legions, and at its heart stood the Sigillite. Malcador did not sleep. Some said he hadn't in centuries, that he had burned it out of himself long ago, some right known only to the ancient order of the Sigillites. Others whispered that sleep was unnecessary when your dreams walked beside you. Whether truth or myth, it didn't matter. Malcador had no time for rest. The traitor legions were moving. The warp storms were not random. The heresy had begun. But the war was still young. And so Malcador did what he always did in moments like this. He began preparing for what others could not yet see. The Emperor had given him a directive long before the storm had broken. Even before Horus's elevation at Ulanor, even before the Librarius was dismantled. A quiet conversation in a sealed room beneath the palace. One of the rare moments where the Master of Mankind had spoken not in riddles or command, but in trust. You must build something they will never understand, the Emperor had said. Malcador, as always, had nodded. Now, with the Emperor trapped upon the golden throne, his words became orders etched into fire, and so the knights-errant were born. They had no heraldry, no banners, no Primarch, no glory, only duty. It began with Nathaniel Garrow. Malcador called him not as a soldier, but as a harbinger. The Death Guard captain had proven himself not only in survival, but in the purity of his soul. Garrow had chosen loyalty over lineage, over legion, over everything he had been raised to believe sacred. That made him dangerous and necessary. Malcador summoned him into the Vault of the Forgotten, deep beneath the Imperial Palace. Its walls were lined with relics of lost ages, truths too volatile for the surface world. And there, under the flicker of impossible runes, Malcador handed Garrow a sigil, an eye formed of obsidian and gold, the very first rosette of the Inquisition. You will find others, Malcador said, men like you, not loyal to a legion, but to mankind. Garrow didn't ask how. He simply accepted. It was the first recruitment, but not the last. Garviel Loken, once a captain of the Luna Wolves, had survived the massacre at Istvan III by miracle or fate. He had wandered the edge of madness, lost in memory and grief, until Garrow found him. Their reunion was not one of celebration, it was a reckoning. Loken had seen Horus's fall with his own eyes. He had watched brothers turn into monsters, and he had endured. When Garrow offered him the sigil, Loken wept, not for the offer, but for the chance to matter again. Soon came Tylos Rubio, formerly of the Ultramarines. Rubio had walked alone in the aftermath of a slaughtered garrison, psychic power bleeding from his mind like smoke from a dying fire. He had survived not because he was strong, but because he had not given in. Each recruit was different. Some were broken, some were angry, all were dangerous. Malcador watched them from afar. Sometimes he guided, sometimes he let events shape them. He believed in pressure, in silence, in giving a man the space to become something greater than he knew he could be. These knights-errant had no uniform, no set creed. Their one unifying belief was loyalty to the Emperor, even in his silence. Malcador outfitted them not with standard astartes arms, but with relics pulled from the depths of the palace. Power swords once wielded by Terran champions long dead, armor inscribed with wards that shimmered under psychic light, and oaths writ in languages spoken only in the dreamscape of psychers. Their missions were not broadcast. They did not fight battles for glory. They fought to recover secrets, to silence traitors before they could call out, to shield what the Imperium didn't even realize was vulnerable. On Calth, they evacuated psyker children before the word-bearers could turn them into fuel for a ritual. On Dagonet, they uncovered a cache of forbidden pre-Imperial AI buried in an ocean trench. AI that could have rewritten every encryption code the Imperium used. On a nameless moon near the Ghoul Stars, one of them, Janus, faced a demonic entity in single combat and endured, not because of strength, but because of the purity of his soul. Malcador knew Janus would be more than a knight. He would be the first of something far greater. But that day had not yet come, for now these warriors walked alone. They infiltrated traitor fleets, sent back whispers of Horus's movements, intercepted astropathic messages twisted with warp song. They didn't stop the heresy, but they slowed it. And that mattered. In the Tower of Hegemon, where the air itself buzzed with psychic residue, Malcador kept a wall of parchment, a record of every knight-errant, where they had come from, what they had done, where they had fallen. He read it daily, not to mourn, but to remember. He never told the High Lords about the knights, never explained them to Dorn or Sanguinius. They were not part of the formal war effort, they were his alone. And when he sat beside the Emperor during those rare moments of clarity when the master of mankind could speak through the pain of the throne, Malcador would offer updates. "They're learning," he'd say, "suffering, becoming what you need." The Emperor never answered in words, but Malcador felt the flicker of approval through the warp. That was enough. One night, as the palace shook from distant orbital strikes, and the light of the Astronomicon pulsed erratically above, Malcador sat in silence. Before him knelt the knights, those who had returned from their missions. Not many, never many. Garrow, Lokin, Rubio, Janus, Severian, a few others. He did not give a speech. He simply walked among them, placing a hand on each shoulder. "Do not seek medals," he said. "Do not expect statues. You will not be remembered. But if mankind endures," he added, "it will be because of you." That was the only oath they ever took. No fanfare, no audience, just a quiet nod. And then they returned to the shadows, knights without banners, fighting a war no one would ever know had been fought. There were no trumpets in this war, no battle banners held aloft, no thunderous charges, no grand proclamations etched in stone. The war Malcador waged now was not fought with legions, but with silence. It was the war behind the war, and it began in whispers. While the traitor legions spread fire through the galaxy, and the siege of Terra crept closer with every bloody sunrise, Malcador the Sigillite fought in corridors with no name, through agents with no past, and against threats that few would ever know existed. This was not the war of Garrow and the Knights Errant. It was not the high theater of the Primarchs or the roaring legions on shattered planets. This was the Silent War. It began, as many of Malcador's decisions did, with a thought written in a margin. While Terra girded itself for siege, and the legions turned brother against brother, Malcador sat in his private vault beneath the Imperial Palace, a single candle burning low beside reams of parchment. The silence in that room was thick, heavy, like the silence before a scream. He drew a sigil on a fresh page. It was not the inquisitorial eye, nor the crest of the Knights Errant. It was something older, a seal last used in the wars before the Imperium, the wars where knowledge itself had been the weapon. He looked at it for a long time, then he whispered one word, "Begin." And the Silent War was born. Malcador had always known the warp was not the Imperium's only enemy. Chaos was many things, demons, gods, corruption, madness, but its greatest weapon was subtlety. Not all traitors wore armor. Not all wars were fought with blades. There were whispers in the Mechanicum, factions that had grown distant from Terra, even as the fires of Mars crackled with civil war. Some tech priests sought to harness warp entities in machines. Others sought knowledge buried beneath the ruins of the Dark Age. None of them asked permission. There were whispers in the void, isolated observatories transmitting messages no human could understand, beacons that pulsed in a rhythm matching no known frequency, listening posts that stopped listening and started answering. There were whispers in the gene labs of forbidden worlds, failed Primarch clones, aborted experiments, psychic children tortured for data. Some of these horrors had been created under orders long forgotten. Some were never ordered at all. And there were whispers in the vaults beneath the Administratum itself. Even on Terra, rot had begun to bloom. Malcador moved against all of them, but not with armies. He had other tools, some of them mortal, rogue psychers pressed into service, remembrancers who had become too adept at hearing what was never meant to be heard. Former criminals given a second chance by being sent into places no loyal soul could survive. Some of them not quite mortal at all. He reactivated the Preceptors, a now forgotten class of Imperial operatives trained in cognitive destabilization and SI feedback. These were men and women who could erase themselves from the minds of others, assassins who didn't kill the body, but the memory. He consulted the Silent Sisters, ordered entire cloisters reactivated. Their presence, once ceremonial, became surgical. They accompanied his agents into warp-touched archives, into rogue librarious cells that had refused to disband after Nicaea, into the minds of those who had stared too long into the Imperium. And when even the sisters were not enough, he acted personally. There are unconfirmed accounts, always unconfirmed, that Malcador appeared in the dreams of certain rogue high officials, that they would awaken screaming, and the next day they would resign, burn their notes, or simply walk into the wastes outside the palace and disappear. There were rumors of a cardinal from the far southern Segmente who had begun to preach a gospel of the Emperor's divinity, faster, more recklessly than even Lorgar had dared. Before any official reprimand could be sent, the man was found in his cathedral, speaking in tongues no mortal could comprehend, his eyes white and his tongue removed. No evidence was ever found, no execution order ever signed. Just a single word etched into the stone beside his pulpit: watched. In the heart of Luna, beneath the vault where the Sisters of Silence trained, Malcador created a library that no one has ever entered twice, not because it was forbidden, but because those who entered never asked to return. There, bound in psycho-reactive iron, were the forbidden texts gathered during the Crusade, sorcerous grimoires from Prospero, demonic lexicons from burned word-bearer chapels, fragments of Zeno's theology translated by scholars who had long since vanished. Malcador read everyone, not out of hunger for power, but because someone had to know. Someone had to understand what was coming, what was already here. The Silent War was not about victory. It was about survival, delay, disruption. If a cult could be silenced before it summoned a demon, that was a victory. If a single message from a warp-touched relay could be intercepted before it reached traitor ears, that was a victory. If an inquisitive astropath could be gently redirected or quietly erased before they cracked open a vault meant never to be touched again, that was a victory. Some victories were bought in blood, some were bought in silence. Malcador paid with both. There are few records of these battles, no statues, no honors, but the implications linger. Entire sectors were saved not by fleets, but by a single agent pressing a single button at the right moment, detonating an ancient satellite to blind a chaos warband before it could find a vulnerable world. Some Legion warships never knew they had been saved, because their would-be destroyers had been turned against one another through Malcador's manipulation of rival cults. He sowed division among the traitors. He whispered into the ears of their own mortal allies, spreading doubt, paranoia, fear. There were times, late in the war, when even Horus's commanders began to wonder, how do they always know where we're going? Why does the warp falter when we summon it? Who told them where to strike? They never found out, because they never heard the whispers. Malcador never claimed the title of Spy Master. He never wore the black of the Officio Assassinorum. But in the War of Secrets, he was the architect, the master, the one who knew the truth, and bore it in silence. He once wrote in a letter never sent, "The heresy is not a wound, it is an infection. We do not merely bleed, we sicken. And if we are to survive, we must not only cauterize the limb, we must sterilize the air itself." And so he did, every day, until the day the gates of Terra began to shake, until the day silence would no longer be enough. But by then he had already done what no legion could. He had held the enemy back, held them confused, fragmented, uncertain. Because in a war of shadows, the one who moves last wins, and Malcador had never finished moving. He didn't call it an inquisition, not then. Names carry weight, and Malcador knew that better than anyone. In the early days of the Silent War, he gave his new project no title, no badge, no banner to rally beneath. He gave it questions, quiet ones, the kind that worm into the soul and refuse to die. Who watches the watchers? What happens when even loyalty is corrupted? What will happen when the Emperor is no longer able to act? These questions burned through Malcador's mind long before Horus had turned, long before the first drops of blood fell on Istvan. He had seen the weakness in the Imperium not in its strength, but in its trust. Trust in systems, trust in oaths, trust in the incorruptibility of demigods. That trust was a lie, and so Malcador began laying the groundwork for a safeguard. A blade hidden within a book, a fire starter disguised as a lantern bearer, something no one could control because everything else could be controlled. It began with 4, not soldiers, not astartes, mortals, chosen not for their strength or their lineage, but for their capacity to know and to withstand what they knew. One was a diplomat who had survived assassination attempts from both Xenos and Imperial officials. One was a scribe who had once transcribed the words of a chaos-corrupted preacher and burned the pages without looking. One was a psyker who had spent years pretending to be mute to avoid being pressed into Legion service. And one was a remembrancer, once a chronicler of glory, now a woman haunted by the truth behind the banners she'd painted. Malcador did not give them titles. He gave them a room. One room. No symbols on the walls, no guards outside. He sat with them for hours in silence before he spoke. "Everything you know about the Imperium is true," he said, "and everything you don't know is more dangerous." He offered them the truth in pieces, gave them glimpses of what the Horus heresy had unleashed, of what chaos truly was. He let them ask questions. He let them speak heresy. And when they shook, when they wept, when one of them vomited on the floor and begged to be erased, Malcador simply waited. Then he said, "Now that you understand, will you help me stop it?" None of them refused, because Malcador wasn't offering them power. He was offering them purpose. They became the core, not of an army, but of an idea, agents without authority, answerable only to the Sigillite, and through him, to the Emperor. They would watch where others turned blind. They would question what others accepted. They would hunt the things that made even the astartes falter. Malcador began sending them out in pairs, cloaked under false titles and covered in forged paperwork that gave them broad permissions to operate across military and civilian structures. Each pair had a different mission. One was sent to investigate the strange psychic emissions coming from a Mechanicum Forge world recently declared non-responsive. Another was embedded in a word-bearer-controlled system, posing as iterators gathering cultural data. A third was sent into the dying remains of a Luna Wolves garrison, looking for survivors, or something worse. Most never returned. Those who did were changed, not broken, but changed. They had seen too much. They had been forced to act without backup, without legions, without certainty. They had been forced to decide in the moment whether to end lives or save them, whether to burn libraries or preserve them, whether to kill a child before the demons inside it awakened. Malcador kept a list of their names, not to honor them, but to remember what he had asked them to become. The concept spread, slowly, quietly. He began recruiting outside Terra. Garrow had proven the worth of Astartes unbound from Legion dogma. Other warriors followed, knights errant, sisters of silence, rogue psychers with their third eyes burned out, Mechanicum Hiertex who had turned against their own kind. Each one was brought before Malcador, not to swear an oath, but to answer a single question: what will you do when the Emperor is gone? Some hesitated. They were sent away. The ones who answered quickly, who understood that the dream must survive even when its architect could no longer speak, were given the sigil. Not the eye we now know. Not yet. It was simpler then. A mark on the inside of the wrist, visible only under ultraviolet light. A single line struck through with a circle, representing cutting through the center of truth and lies alike. They used it to identify each other in the dark. No greetings, no signs, just the flash of the wrist. And then the work continued. By the time the Siege of Terra began in earnest, there were dozens of these agents. Unrecorded, unnamed, unseen. They exposed cults buried within the administratum. They assassinated rogue psychers before they could summon demons behind the front lines. They captured warp-corrupted artifacts that could have undone entire planetary populations and sealed them in vaults beneath the Imperial Palace, marked only with numbers and fear. Some questioned whether Malcador had created monsters. He wondered the same. He did not expect them to be moral. He expected them to be necessary. And in his most private thoughts, he knew these would be the last defense after the heresy. When the war was won, if the Emperor survived, he would need something that could keep the Imperium clean. And if the Emperor fell, then the Imperium would need someone to be ruthless in his absence. When he finally named them, it was not during a ceremony. It was not recorded. He stood with them in the vault of ashes deep beneath the throne, and he simply said, "You are Inquisitors now. Go and find the rot." That was it. No badge, no armor, only purpose, only fire. Later, the order would become bloated, its branches would split, and its methods grow cruel. But in that moment, in that room, the Inquisition was pure. A scalpel forged by a dying man, pressed into the hands of those willing to cut deep enough to save a dying empire. And when Malcador looked at them, he saw the future. Dark, terrible, but still alive. It is a strange thing to witness the birth of monsters, but stranger still to shape them. And know you must. While the legions clashed across the void and the walls of the Imperial Palace groaned under the strain of imminent siege, Malcador was still building, not defenses of stone or steel, but weapons of soul and silence. And in this hidden war there was a task even darker than the Inquisition, one so secret that even the Lords of Terra would not speak of it, even as the stars burned. The Grey Knights. Though that name did not yet exist, they were still nameless when they were born, ghosts in plain armor, blades not yet honed, but Malcador had been crafting them long before the heresy, even before Nicaea, even before the Librarius was dismantled and the Primarchs began whispering of sorcery and corruption. He had seen it coming, the need for something more than warriors, more than agents, more than even Inquisitors. He needed an answer to the warp itself, a shield that could walk and strike and never falter. So he began gathering. In secret vaults beneath the Imperial Palace, so deep that even the Mechanicum refused to send their machines, Malcador worked alone. Sometimes with the Sisters of Silence, sometimes with the Custodians, but mostly in the company of ghosts. The ghosts of ideas. The ghosts of futures that might never be. From the very beginning, he knew what was required. Purity. Not the simple purity of genetics or training, but a deeper kind. The kind that could not be taught. The kind that resisted corruption not out of ignorance, but because it had looked into the abyss and refused to fall. He found eight astartes. Not all from loyal legions. Some came from traitor lines, survivors of massacres, warriors who had watched their brothers fall to demons and had chosen not to follow. Their names are not recorded, not in any open archive. They are known only by code names, whispers, and in the minds of those few who stood beside them in that first circle. Janus, Keon, Chiron, Epimetheus. Others, their identities scrubbed even from Malcador's private journals. Each of them had been tested, not in battle, in spirit. Malcador brought them together one by one, not in Terra but on a hidden moon, a place outside time, outside reach. Titan. No record had ever placed Titan within the Sol system. That was by design. The warp-shrouded vault world had been prepared in advance, its coordinates erased, its defenses automated, its databanks sealed beneath layers of psychic encryption. Malcador had begun its construction before Horus's rebellion. Before Ulanor, he had always known. The fortress he built there was not just a stronghold, it was a monastery, not for prayer, but for refinement. There were libraries stocked with every text the Imperium had banned, artifacts gathered from demon-haunted worlds, Vox recordings of possessed captains, transcripts from warp-echoed rituals. Everything that had been burned on Terra was here, preserved. Because to fight chaos, one must know it, and Malcador would not let ignorance destroy the Imperium again. When the 8 astartes arrived, they did not greet one another. They did not speak of brotherhood. They came in silence. Each of them understood what they had been summoned to become, and Malcador gave them no speeches, only tools. Each was offered a psi codex, a living book bound in skin, infused with warding glyphs and encrypted psychic signals. They would learn from it, and one day they would become it. Each was offered a sword, a true sword, not a chain blade or a relic-forged relic. A simple weapon, but one infused with null metal, primed to be a channel for will. Each was offered a name, not a code name. A true name, not theirs by birth, but a name forged in oaths that bound them forever. They accepted, and with that, the order began. Malcador returned to Terra, not because his work was finished, but because now it could continue without him. Back beneath the palace, Malcador met with the Emperor, or rather, what remained of him. The Golden Throne had become his prison and his battlefield. There were days the Emperor could not speak, only radiate flickers of command through the warp. Malcador kneeled and said only this: "They are in place," and he felt the reply, not in words but in certainty. Approval. That night he summoned the 4 mortals who had become his first inquisitors. He brought them to the sealed chamber. He introduced them to the Grey Knights. No one spoke. They understood. This was not the future. It was the contingency. If the Imperium survived, they would remain in shadow. If it fell, they would be the ones to rebuild it. Together they watched the stars from Titan. The storm clouds of chaos were thickening. The siege of Terra loomed, and Malcador, for the first time, allowed himself a moment of reflection. He had not built this order out of ambition. He had built it out of terror, because he knew, deep in his bones, in the marrow of his millennia of service, the Emperor would not return from this war unchanged, and someone had to be ready for what came after. In the final page of that month's record, sealed in a cipher even the Inquisition would never break, Malcador wrote a single phrase: "They are the Emperor's last whisper. May they never need to be his scream." The Grey Knights did not fight at Terra. They were never meant to. They were the blade behind the curtain, the fire beneath the ice. But when they were called, when the galaxy was on fire and the gods walked in the open, they would not flinch, because Malcador had already made them into something more than astartes. He had made them necessary. It was quiet in the chamber of the throne. Not the silence of emptiness, but the kind that comes when even the air dares not breathe. The kind of silence that settles on the bones of a world before something ends. The kind of silence that can only exist when gods speak in whispers instead of thunder. Malcador stood alone before the Golden Throne, his staff dim, the flame at its tip no longer dancing. Even the psychic wind that always stirred around the mechanisms of the throne had subsided. No custodians flanked the walls today, no scribes, no mechanicum adepts, no guards, no ceremony, only Malcador and the Emperor. The machine that cradled the master of mankind groaned, just barely audible beneath the layered golden plates and arcane coils. Beneath the surface, souls burned, thousands sacrificed daily to keep the Astronomicon alight. Their deaths were quiet, regulated, routine, necessary. Malcador had signed every authorization. He approached slowly. There was no fear in him, no awe. He had long ago bled such emotions dry. The man seated upon the throne, half flesh, half light, was no longer the warlord he had once known, no longer the visionary who had whispered the first words of unity across the battlefields of Terra. That man still existed, yes, but he had been buried, piece by piece, beneath millennia of sacrifice. Still, he looked at Malcador, not with eyes, with presence. They had not spoken like this in months, not since Horus began his final push inward, not since the walls of the Imperial Palace began to scream with bombardment, not since the stars themselves wept under the weight of the War Master's betrayal. The Emperor's voice, when it came, was not spoken aloud. It was felt, like warmth against the spine, like truth in the marrow. "It is time." Malcador said nothing at first. He closed his eyes and let the weight of those words settle. He had known they were coming. He had prepared. And still, when the moment arrived, he found it hard to draw breath. He stepped closer. "We're not ready," he said softly. "The outer walls still hold, but barely. Dawn is stretched thin. Sanguinius won't last forever in the upper tiers. And the reserves, they're boys, my lord, children in armor. Most of them haven't seen a real battlefield." He hesitated, searching the air for a response. None came. "But you already know that." The golden hum of the throne pulsed once, like the beat of an ancient heart. Malcador looked up. "You're going to face him," he said. Not a question, a statement. He could feel it, the resolve pouring off the Emperor like molten iron. The decision had been made. Horus had to be stopped. No more waiting. No more guiding the battle from afar. No more prayers that one of the loyal legions would strike the killing blow. Only one being could stop the War Master now, and he was already seated. "You'll need someone to sit in your place," Malcador continued, "to hold the webway, to anchor the gate, to stop it from opening wide and swallowing Terra whole." Still no reply, just the low, endless hum. Malcador did not plead. He did not protest. He had always known this moment would come. "I will do it," he said. There was a pause. Then gently, as if carried on the last breath of a dying star, the Emperor's voice reached into him again. "You will die." Malcador gave a bitter smile. "So will you." The silence returned, thicker than before. He lowered his head, not in submission, but in acceptance. There was no one else who could take the throne, not a Primarch, not a custodian. Only Malcador had the will, the power, the experience. Only he could withstand even a fraction of what the Emperor endured every moment. He had always walked a step behind the light. Now he would stand in its place and be burned away. He stepped back. He still had preparations to make, arrangements, farewells. But the Emperor was not finished. There is one more task. A flicker of thought, images, concepts, a place hidden deeper than the vaults of the Sigillites, a memory locked behind the Emperor's psychic barriers. A seed. Malcador's eyes widened as he understood. "Now?" he asked. "Before the end?" Malcador hesitated. "If I do this, you'll be alone." The answer was immediate. "I already am." He bowed his head again, more deeply this time, not in worship, in grief. And then he turned and walked from the chamber, his steps slow, his back straight, his staff tapping gently against the stone. As he passed the threshold, the warding runes behind him flared briefly in deep red. He did not look back. That night, Malcador met with Rogal Dorn for the last time. They did not speak of the plan, only of Terra, of memories, of what it had been like back when the palace had not yet been a fortress, when gardens still grew on the spire balconies, when the stars were still filled with hope. Dorn did not cry, but when Malcador left, he looked to the west and whispered a name no one recorded. Later, Malcador wrote a letter. Not a report, not a command, a simple note left on his desk. To those who remember me, if any survive, I have no legacy to give. I was not a warrior. I was not a king. I was only the man who stood beside him, and that was enough. Malcador. Then he returned to the throne chamber. This time there were witnesses. Dorn Valdor, a handful of custodians, a few Mechanicum adepts already preparing the interface, and the Emperor. He gave them no speech. He did not ask for applause. He simply looked at the Emperor one last time, and the Emperor inclined his head, the only gesture he could still offer. Malcador walked to the edge of the throne, paused, and whispered, "It has been an honor." Then he sat. The machine responded instantly. Psychic energy surged, brighter than lightning, louder than storms. Warp pressure crushed inward like a collapsing star. Malcador screamed once and was silent forever. For the next 13 hours his body endured, not through strength, through will, through the kind of loyalty that reshapes reality. He held the gate, held the webway, held the weight of infinity, so the Emperor could leave the throne, so he could face his son, so he could save mankind. When the Emperor returned, broken, dying, victorious, Malcador was no longer a man. He was ash, and that ash was still smoldering. Dorn tried to gather it. Some say it blew away in the wind. Some say it vanished in a flare of light. All that remained was the staff, still warm, still upright, still waiting. Malcador the Sigillite, first Lord of Terra, Regent of the Imperium, last confidant of the Emperor, was gone. But in the silence he left behind, 1,000 futures still stirred, because he had never worked for glory. He had worked for tomorrow. There is a room beneath the Imperial Palace that no one dares open, not for fear of traps, not for rites, but because opening it would mean admitting something sacred had been lost forever. It is not marked on any blueprint, though it exists in every copy of the Mechanicum's vault schematics, its coordinates scrambled, its biometric locks attuned to a heartbeat that no longer beats. At the center of that sealed chamber sits a chair, not a throne, just a chair, wooden, simple, placed beside a cold brazier and a faded empty desk. On the desk is a single object, Malcador's staff, unbroken, upright, still humming with a heat that should have long since faded. They say the custodes check it once a year, not because they expect anything to change, but because they hope it might. For even among the Emperor's companions, Malcador's death was not just a loss, it was a fracture. The day after Malcador gave his soul to the Golden Throne, the Astronomicon began to flicker. Just once. Just enough for navigators across the segmentum solar to feel a tremor in their minds. Then it surged brighter, stronger. It was as if the universe had paused for a heartbeat, acknowledging what had been given. But the price remained. The man who had stood beside the Emperor for uncountable years was gone. No corpse, no shrine, just his absence. Rogal Dorn did not speak for 3 days after Malcador's death. He stood atop the battlements of the inner palace, looking out at the horizon where the traitors would soon come. He held no blade, gave no orders. When questioned, he simply said, "I have lost the man who told me when I was wrong." The custodians observed their own rites in private. Their gene-coded memories had cataloged every moment of Malcador's presence. His gait, the rhythm of his speech, the way he ran his fingers across the edge of a data slate when deep in thought. They would later admit that none among them had ever dared to look him in the eye for long, not because he was terrifying, because he understood too much. Among the Silent Sisters, the reaction was stranger still. In their main convent on Luna, they enacted the ritual of quietus, an observance reserved for the passing of figures who had altered the fate of the species. The sisters gathered in a vast underground hall, lined with psycho-absorbent marble. They formed a circle of absolute stillness, placing in its center the tattered robe Malcador had worn during his early negotiations with them. A robe he had once folded and left in their archives without explanation. Then they sat and did nothing for 16 hours. No movement, no gesture, no breath louder than a heartbeat. In the stillness, the warp recoiled. Even demons, it is said, went quiet during that moment. The act itself radiated across the Imperium, a psychic eulogy composed of silence and sorrow. But nowhere was Malcador's death felt more profoundly than in the hidden corners of the Imperium he had built in secret. On Titan, the Proto-Grey Knights received no formal transmission. There was no coded message, no ritual. Instead, on the stroke of midnight, the Fortress Moon's internal cogitators shut down for exactly 6 minutes and 66 seconds. When the systems returned, a single line of text glowed on the central lectern in the Librarius Sanctum. He holds the door no longer. It is ours now. The Grey Knights bowed in unison, without command. From that moment, they ceased to be merely Malcador's creation. They became his legacy. And still, the war raged. The siege of Terra burned like a star gone mad. The traitor legions shattered the outer walls. The defenders fell back step by step, leaving behind the dead and the prayers of a broken people. Horus was on Luna. The sky itself split with the screams of dying void ships. And yet, somewhere beneath the palace, the echo of Malcador's footsteps remained. For even in death, his plans endured. Vaults opened that no one had known existed. Contingency orders activated without names, signed only with the sigil of the Sigillite. Agents moved in shadows. Reinforcements arrived from sources no general had summoned. Data caches hidden in the walls of dying worlds began to stream into Terra, delivering intelligence that saved lives by the second. Because Malcador had never trusted fate, he had built for every possibility, even this, even after himself. Some say that the Emperor wept. No one can prove it. But during the final hours of the siege, just before he ascended the ramp to the vengeful spirit, just before he would face Horus in the duel that would break his body and bind him to the Golden Throne forever, he paused, only once, at the base of the Eternity Gate. He turned, looked down a long hallway lined with silent custodians, and said one word, Malcador. Then he passed through the gate and was gone. In the centuries after the heresy, Malcador would become myth. Some called him the Emperor's shadow, others his voice. Some whispered that he had been a perpetual, immortal like the Master himself. Others insisted he had merely been the last Sigillite, a title older than history, inherited from a forgotten order that had walked alongside mankind since it first reached for the stars. The truth, lost, erased perhaps by Malcador's own hand, but traces remain, if one knows where to look. The oldest vaults of the Inquisition contain records signed not with names, but with a burning eye surrounded by 7 glyphs. No one knows what the glyphs mean. They're pre-imperial, untranslatable, but they burn when touched. In the depths of Titan, beneath even the armory vaults, lies a locked sphere forged from phase glass and psychic ice. It has no door, no mechanism, just a phrase carved into its surface. Only when all is lost may you open me. No one has dared. Yet. And the staff remains, still standing, still humming faintly with warmth that has no source. Some say that if you stand beside it long enough and close your eyes, you can hear his voice. A whisper, not of comfort, but of reminder. A voice that says, do not seek glory. Do not ask for thanks. Do not wait for the light. Be the fire that holds back the dark. That was Malcador, not a Primarch, not a warrior, but the last man who dared to walk beside a god. And never flinched. Long before the siege, long before Titan was hidden, long before Garrow swore his silent oath beneath the palace, Malcador had commissioned a tower. Not one of stone or gold or marble, but of memory. Few knew of its existence. Fewer knew its name. The Sigillite called it the Tower of the Unspoken. It had no windows, no heraldry. Its walls were a dull, ancient alloy, unadorned, humming faintly with warding runes, drawn not with ink, but with thoughts pressed into reality. It stood buried beneath the lower levels of the Imperial Palace, just east of the forgotten foundations of the Panopticon archives, deeper even than the sealed warp chambers used to house captured demonic relics. And it was sealed, not by locks, by questions. To even find the tower, one had to answer a sequence of thoughts projected through the warp, riddles of paradox, trial, sacrifice, and loyalty. Each question cut deeper than the last, not into knowledge but into belief, because that is what the tower held, not weapons, not artifacts, truths. Malcador had filled it over centuries, building it like a surgeon constructs a ledger of scars. In its hollowed-out chambers, wrapped in null fields and ghostlight, were things the Imperium could never be allowed to know. Not for fear of rebellion, but because some truths could not be born without breaking. The tower was a vault for the unbearable. It held the last intact memory cores of the men of iron, not to replicate, but to understand, to remind. It held soul recordings of psychers consumed by chaos, screaming even now inside psi crystal prisons. It held the remains of a single Xenos artifact recovered by the Emperor himself during the Age of Strife, so potent in its presence that even the Custodes refused to remain near it for more than 10 seconds. And in its lowest level, there was something more dangerous than all of them. A chair, nothing more. Simple, plain, untouched by time. No one knew where it had come from, not even Malcador, by his own admission. It had been there when he found the chamber that would become the tower's root. It could not be moved, could not be scanned, could not be seen psychically. But when he first touched it, he received a vision, a glimpse of Terra, on fire, of the Emperor, broken but alive, of an Imperium ruled not by unity, but by fear. And beside the golden throne, an empty space, not a throne, a void, a place where someone should have stood. Malcador had recoiled from the vision. He spent 3 days in a meditative trance, surrounded by a protective ward spun from 9 languages no longer spoken. He spoke to no one, ate nothing. When he emerged, he ordered the chamber sealed and made a vow never written. "If I must die," he whispered, "let it be to stop this." He never told the Emperor what he had seen, but from that day on, the tower became his most sacred place. Not even the Grey Knights were allowed entry, not the Sisters of Silence. Only once did he bring another soul into its halls, an acolyte, barely more than a boy. One of the many he trained and discarded, never naming them, never letting them think they were permanent. The boy's name is lost, but his memory lives in a scrap of parchment left behind on Malcador's desk. He saw the tower and went mad, not from what he witnessed, but from what I would not explain. Malcador regretted it, but he did not stop. The tower had to exist, because he knew, after the heresy, the Imperium would not heal, it would harden, it would forget. and in forgetting it would rot from the inside. So the tower stood, waiting, not to be used, but to be remembered. A reminder not to seek strength without understanding, not to bury what could not be destroyed. In his final days, Malcador returned there. 3 days before he would take the throne in the Emperor's place, before his soul would be burned across the lattice of the webway, before his body would collapse into ash, he walked the silent corridors one last time. His staff dimmed, not from weakness, but from resolve. He stopped before the chair at the base of the tower. He did not sit. He simply looked at it and said, "Not me. Not ever." Then he turned away. As he ascended the spiral staircase, each level flickered to life for a brief instant, like an old friend bowing farewell. The psi crystals stopped screaming. The null fields thrummed once. The men of iron cores blinked as if sighing in resignation. He placed a single new object in the highest level, a cube, made of gold and thought. Inside it, locked by 10 layers of silence, was a single sentence. A truth Malcador could never risk anyone discovering. Not yet. On the surface of the cube, he engraved a final message. When the Imperium no longer fears the truth, break this. Then he sealed the chamber. He erased the path from the minds of the few who still knew it, and finally he whispered a rite known only to the Emperor himself. The Tower of the Unspoken vanished. Some believe it is still there, not in space, not in matter, but in a fold of will. They say the Grey Knights sometimes hear footsteps in the vaults of Titan, footsteps that end at walls that don't exist. They say that inquisitors who reach the rank of Lord Terribilis begin to dream of stairs descending into darkness, but when they wake, they forget where the stairs led. And they say that once, during a demonic incursion on a remote forge world, a child fell into a chasm and disappeared. When she was found days later, unharmed, she clutched a sigil in her hand, an ancient eye crossed by 7 points, burned into her palm. She said a man in gray robes had told her, "You're not ready for the answers. But one day, someone will be." When the Inquisition examined her, they found her completely untouched by the warp. Her memories were flawless. She spoke 6 languages she'd never learned, and she never dreamed again. The tower was not a weapon. It was a memory, too dangerous to be known, too important to be lost. It was Malcador's last lesson, his last contingency, and perhaps his greatest hope. Even as the palace walls cracked beneath the hammer of traitor guns, Malcador the Sigillite continued his final labor. He was not on the walls, nor in the sky. He did not command artillery batteries or walk among the wounded like Dorn or Sanguinius. He did not need to. His battlefield lay elsewhere, one made not of trenches and banners, but of maps, of futures, of possibility itself. Malcador was drawing a map, not of territory, of time. It began the night before he stepped onto the golden throne. Alone, cloaked in the candlelight of a forgotten strategium chamber, he stood before a table the size of a landing pad, its surface layered with ancient parchment and fresh astropathic charts, etched with ink that shimmered ever so slightly with psychic residue. Dozens of globes hovered above it, Terra, Mars, Luna, Sol. Others blinked into view, their names obscured by static. Not one of them showed victory. Not a single map depicted a future where the Imperium emerged whole from the heresy. Horus's rebellion had torn open not just the heavens, but the shape of the Imperium's soul. Everything had changed, and Malcador saw it clearer than anyone. He was not building plans to win the war. He was preparing for what came after. The Sigillite always believed that history could be charted, if not predicted. That beneath the madness of warp storms and the rage of gods, there existed structures, patterns that whispered what could come if one only listened closely enough. The Chamber of the Possible Futures had been his private sanctum since before the Crusade began, a place of contemplative madness. A hall carved from the ancient data caverns beneath the Imperial Palace, its walls lined with the skulls of failed prophets and memory engram archives captured from 1,000 worlds. Here, Malcador had once spent 6 years attempting to map the likelihood of mankind's extinction. He had failed, but only narrowly. Now, as terror bled above, he returned to those scrolls. He began by redrawing the great Imperial projection, what had once been the Emperor's dream of a united galaxy. But this time he slashed it through with crimson ink, lines of fracture, void bridges that would never be repaired, warp tides that no longer followed reason. Sector by sector, system by system, he marked what would fall, what might stand, and what must be sacrificed. There was no bitterness in his actions, just calculation. Somewhere in the endless dark, Guilliman still fought to maintain order. The lion hunted traitors in the void. Vulcan was missing, Korax wounded, the Khan unreachable, and the Emperor. The Emperor was dying a second death before the first had even come. Malcador adjusted the map again. This time he began inserting names, not of generals or admirals, but of unknowns. He made boxes, blanks where he sensed the future would require a figure, a burning world with no ruler, a crusade without a leader, a heresy without an inquisitor. Then, beside those blanks, he wrote code names: the Witch, the Pariah, the Blade, the Echo. Not real identities, just placeholders for inevitabilities, people not yet born, events not yet kindled. He was charting where fate would need to intervene, and he would plant the seeds now. That was how Malcador fought. He summoned archivists from the Librarius Occultus, not to translate, but to witness. He dictated instructions in tongues that hadn't been spoken since the Pale Synod. He gave orders to encode his predictive models into psi-locked stasis scrolls, scrolls that would only unlock when the correct soul touched them. To a scribe of the Ordo Chronos, he said, "This is not a plan for victory. This is a ledger of failure. Every mark here is a price we will pay. My task is not to prevent collapse. It is to make sure the survivors can climb out from the rubble." Even that scribe, trained in the impassivity of the Chrono Magi, wept quietly. Malcador marked another system on the map, Nicera Prime. Once a thriving Skolam world, it had been consumed by demonic fire at the height of the heresy. The legions had written it off. But Malcador had seen something. A single transmission buried in warp static, detailing the escape of 3 children, orphans from an unknown psychic testing initiative. One had drawn a sigil of warding on the wall of a refugee shuttle before it passed into warp space unharmed. Malcador highlighted the name. "Find them," he told his agents. "Preserve them. They are not weapons. They are keystones." Elsewhere on the map, he drew a jagged circle around an uncharted world in the Eastern Fringe. No known name, no record in the Mechanicum archives. He wrote beside it, "Here the light will die and be born again. Bury it well." To most, this would have seemed madness. But Malcador understood that history was a weapon. And if the Imperium was to survive the wounds Horus had carved into its soul, it would need new myths. That, too, he began to craft. He summoned iterators, those few remaining Imperial orators who had once preached the ideals of the Great Crusade, and charged them with a new task. Not to record truth, to shape memory. "You will not write what happened," he told them. "You will write what must be remembered." And so began the Great Forgetting. The Thunder Warriors were erased again. The failings of the Primarchs were buried in myth. The fractures in the Emperor's plan were sealed behind layers of scripture. Even Malcador's own name. He crossed it out on his archives, replacing it with ciphers and pseudonyms. He knew that the Imperium could not endure if it remembered too clearly. Some truths would fracture what he had sacrificed himself to preserve, but he also knew the danger of too much forgetting. So he left hidden trails, encrypted vaults, encoded dream maps in the warp, sigil-burned phrases locked in the mind of surviving psychers, ready to awaken only when the stars aligned again. He was building a time bomb made of knowledge, one that would explode not in fire but in revelation, when the Imperium was ready, if it was ever ready. And as the siege crept closer, Malcador stood over his map one final time. He looked down at the future, not with hope, but with clarity. The lines were drawn. The wound would not be healed, but it could be endured, because he had charted the ruins, and in those ruins something might still grow. He placed his hand on the map. It glowed faintly where he touched it, a final command embedded in the folds of time itself. When the silence breaks, follow the ashes. Then he turned and walked away, to the throne, to his death, to the moment that would allow the Emperor to stand one final time. And behind him, on the map of futures that would never come true, a single phrase flickered, unspoken, but true. You may break the Empire, but I have drawn the path beyond it. Beneath the Imperial Palace, deeper than even the silent vaults or the soul crypts of the Sisters of Silence, there lies a place that almost no one knows exists. No signs mark its entrance, no servitor patrols its halls. It is hidden in a fold of reality, tucked behind psychic seals that twist perception and fracture memory. It is called the Librarium Nihilis, the Book of the Dead, and it was Malcador's final sanctuary. He began building it centuries before the unification of Terra was complete, before even the first gene seed was stabilized, before the idea of the Space Marines had passed beyond the drawing slate of the Emperor's mind. It was not a library in the traditional sense, not a cathedral of knowledge as the Mechanicum might build. It was something much older, more primal. It was remembrance, and it was warning. Every record within the Librarium Nihilis was handwritten, not printed, not engraved, not copied, written by Malcador's own hand or under his direct instruction. That was the rule. The cost of falsifying a single entry, even unintentionally, was death. Not as punishment, but as necessity, because the Librarium contained only one kind of knowledge: loss. Every failure, every betrayal, every soul that had burned away in service to the Emperor or defied him and paid the price. The Book of the Dead was not bound in one volume, but many, shelved without order, without category. Some books were the size of data slates bound in tanned hide. Others were tomes taller than a man, inked in blood beneath leaden seals. A few were alive, pulsing faintly, their contents unreadable without a psychic lens, because what they recorded was not written in words, but in grief. This was where Malcador came when he had no more moves to make, when every future had narrowed to death, when the golden throne loomed above him like the mouth of a beast. He came here with the intention to write one final name, his own. He arrived in silence. Even the sisters who escorted him said nothing as he passed. They did not follow him in. They simply watched as he descended the iron staircase, torchlight catching the edge of his staff, casting a long shadow that stretched down and down and down. No guards followed, no custodians. Malcador had always walked this path alone. When he reached the chamber at the bottom, he stopped. His breath did not tremble. He did not glance back. The room was cold, not physically, but spiritually. The Librarium Nihilis was a place where even the warp dared not intrude. Not out of reverence, but out of recognition. Malcador lit a single candle. The flame guttered in defiance, dancing as if angry to be awoken in such a place. He sat at the central lectern. In front of him, a blank page. One sheet. Perfect. Unmarked. It had waited centuries for this moment. He uncapped a pen carved from the horn of a Thulian shadow beast, a creature extinct since the earliest days of Old Night. Its ink was distilled memory, mixed with ash and preserved sorrow. Then Malcador began to write. He did not begin with his name. He began with hers, Elira. She had been the first psyker he ever trained. Not for war, not for battle, for empathy. She had once calmed riots in the lower hive of Vica Primus with nothing but her voice, amplified through the minds of the mob. She had lived to be 25 before a daemon found her in a dream and broke her mind like porcelain. Malcador wrote her name with a flourish, and beside it, light lost beneath the storm. Then he wrote Valtaire, the administrator who uncovered a warp-tainted encryption buried in a word-bearer's astropathic diary and killed himself rather than risk infection. Malcador remembered how his last message was only 3 words: keep them safe. He wrote Solon Ver, the renegade remembrancer who betrayed an entire fleet to the Alpha Legion, then spent her final moments feeding false data into their systems, saving an ultramarine strike team before she bled out beneath the reactor she sabotaged. He wrote Arco Voln, the lone human who had survived Prospero and returned not as a sorcerer, but as a librarian, preserving what could be saved. Malcador had buried him personally beneath the palace walls. He wrote Kalivi, the pariah child who had stood silently while 3 rogue psychers tore their own minds apart in her presence, and then had begged Malcador not to make her do it again. He wrote names the Imperium would never honor, would never even remember. Names spoken only in the dark, names carved into the very bones of the Imperium's survival. And finally, after the ink had dried, after the candle had guttered low, he turned to the last line and wrote Malcador the Sigillite, the last friend. There was no flourish, no eulogy, only truth. He stared at it for a long moment, not in vanity, not in fear, in peace, because he had never expected to survive. He had only ever hoped that what he built would. He stood. He rolled the parchment, sealed it in wax made from the fat of candles used during the Emperor's unification sermons, and placed it on the shelf beside only one other scroll, a scroll the Emperor himself had written during the earliest days of the Great Crusade. Neither would be read again, not until the stars burned low. As Malcador ascended the staircase, the Librarium Nihilis grew darker behind him, candlelight fading. He did not look back. There was nothing more to say. The past had been recorded. The future, if it came, would decide what to do with the memories he had guarded. And if no one came, if the Imperium collapsed into silence and madness, then the books would endure, whispering the names of the dead to no one at all. Because Malcador understood something the Primarchs never could. Victory was not built on triumph. It was built on remembrance. And in the deepest vault of humanity's last hope, the man who had never asked to be remembered ensured that no one else would be forgotten. It is said by those who dwell near the Golden Throne that time behaves strangely within the Hall of Eternity. The seconds stretch thin like threads pulled taut across a drumhead. Minutes become hours, thoughts spiral into days. And at the heart of it all sits a corpse that rules a galaxy, and the machine that keeps the fire of humanity barely alive. The Emperor of mankind does not move. He does not speak. Yet his will radiates outward like the slow heartbeat of a dying star, holding back the tide of chaos through nothing but the violence of his existence. But there was a time, just one, when he was not upon that throne, when someone else sat there bearing its burden, not as ruler, as a tether, as an anchor. Malcador the Sigillite, the soul anchor of mankind. The hour before his ascent was quiet. No guards, no procession. The Mechanicum adepts had completed their calibrations. The Custodes had stepped back into the shadows. The sisters had said their silent prayers. Even the Emperor, still radiant despite the wear of centuries, had grown still. Only Malcador remained in motion, his footsteps light, deliberate, as he paced around the golden throne for the final time. He did not wear his robes of state, no regalia, only a simple gray garment bound with the same belt he had worn during the Unification Wars, threadbare with a clasp in the shape of a stylized eye, no symbols of rank, no titles carved into the fabric. He had no need for them anymore. He was beyond role, beyond name. The Emperor sat slumped, already gathering his strength, already withdrawing his essence into the psychic deep. What he was preparing to do would tear reality open, would strike at the heart of his most beloved son, and perhaps kill what remained of his own soul. And someone had to hold the gate in his absence. Malcador approached the throne's base. He reached out and placed one hand on its cold brass surface. For a heartbeat, a flicker of fire snapped up his arm, wreathing his fingertips in blue lightning. But he did not flinch. He had spent centuries preparing for this, channeling, warding, weaving rites of soul fortitude into the very marrow of his bones. Still, he felt the pressure behind the veil. A tidal wave of voices, thousands, millions, howling, hungry, the webway. Without the Emperor to hold its gate shut, the demons would pour through the breach beneath the palace, erupting into the throne world like blood through a cracked heart. Malcador did not blink. He turned. Dawn stood at the far end of the hall, unmoving, the last friend Malcador would ever see. They locked eyes. No words passed between them. They had been through too much for words. Then Malcador sat. The pain was immediate, not pain like fire, not pain like the breaking of bones. It was identity pain, a soul being torn open, layer by layer, until even the name Malcador seemed to unravel. His thoughts scattered. He forgot the tower of the unspoken. He forgot Titan. He forgot the scent of parchment, the scratch of quill on vellum, the weight of the Emperor's gaze on his shoulder in their youth. All he could see was light, and beneath it, darkness clawing upward, screaming his name backwards and inside out. The demons came first, not in form but in pressure, in ideas, in shapes that defied logic. They pressed against the breach, shrieking, sensing that the mind holding them back was not the Emperor's, but something lesser, something mortal. They laughed, but Malcador laughed back. His laughter echoed across the psychic lattice of the throne, warping into a chime like shattering crystal. "You want me?" he whispered into the void. "Then come and be bound." And so they came. The first were the Weepers, demonic echoes of those Malcador had once failed. Iliara, Solenver, even Magnus in the form of a broken child. They showed him visions of his own failings, offered him release, begged him to relinquish control. He held fast. The next wave brought temptation. Voices promising resurrection, knowledge beyond the Emperor's own. A galaxy reborn not in fire, but in perfect balance. If only Malcador would yield the throne for a moment, just a moment. Let go. Breathe. He clenched the arms of the throne until his fingers bled. Still he held. Time began to melt. The pressure increased. Veins in his face darkened. His skin cracked like old wood, psychic energy bursting from the rents in his flesh. Even the custodes, watching in horror, whispered prayers they did not know. He had held the throne for only an hour, and yet, in the warp, it had been centuries. Some say Malcador saw every future during those moments, every ending, every betrayal yet to come, every victory that would become a curse. He saw Guilliman crowned as regent, saw the ecclesiarchy rise, saw the Imperium lose its soul in fire and bureaucracy, saw the Inquisition become its own god. He saw the rise of Abaddon, the fall of Cadia, the awakening of the Necrons, the birth of the Great Rift. He saw the false dawn of the Primarchs and the silent hunger of the Tyranids spreading through the galactic dark. He saw it all, and he wept, not in sorrow, in clarity, because this too must be endured. This was the price, and he paid it, heartbeat by heartbeat, his body failing, but his mind still wrapped around the breach, fingers clutched tight around the gate of mankind's survival. The Emperor returned. He had faced Horus. He had broken his son, and had been broken in turn. He staggered back to the throne, carried half-conscious by the custodians, his psychic form flickering, raw, almost undone. And Malcador let go. He did not speak. He did not move. He simply exhaled and vanished, ash and light. That was all. Later, Dawn would find the staff, still upright beside the throne, still warm, the only relic of a man who had once been the right hand of a god. The custodians wanted to seal it in a vault. Dawn refused. He placed it in a chamber of remembrance, and beside it he carved a plaque with no name. Only this: he held the door when no one else could. He gave us time, and in the end that was enough. Malcador did not die screaming. He did not rage or beg or cry. He burned brightly, quietly, like the last star in a dying galaxy, choosing for one final moment to shine. Even in death, Malcador had not truly gone. The galaxy may have turned without him. Empires risen, Primarchs lost, the stars may have shifted in their endless spiral. But there were places in the Imperium where his presence had never faded. Quiet corridors, sealed vaults, minds marked by his touch. He had left behind no body, no tomb, no mausoleum of marble and gold. That would have been blasphemy to the man who had shunned glory for labor. But his echo, the psychic imprint of a soul burned to fuel humanity's survival, remained. And like all echoes, it lingered in the corners, in the places others had forgotten to look. The first echo appeared 3 days after his death. A custodian named Valis Kor, one of the Emperor's personal guard, awoke in the antechamber of the Golden Throne, his thoughts clouded, his mouth tasting of ash. No one had entered the chamber, no alarms had sounded, but upon the table where Malcador's final briefing scrolls had once rested, there now lay a single item, a key. No explanation, no origin. Just a rune carved into its length, a spiral of 9 loops ending in a dot. A cipher that did not exist in any known Terran script. Valas didn't understand it, but he knew, the way only a custodian could know, that it had not been there before, and that it had once belonged to Malcador. That key would not be used for another 700 years. When it was, it unlocked a vault on an abandoned lunar observatory, one which contained the only known recording of a failed Imperial attempt to weaponize the Emperor's own gene code. The project was quietly incinerated. Billions were saved. None knew why the key had appeared, but a single line was found etched into the inside of the vault door. Some fires must be buried before they burn the future. In the halls of Vindication, deep beneath the inquisitorial fortress world of Stalinvast, Lord Inquisitor Kesselman once reported waking from a nightmare that did not feel like his own. In it, he stood in a war-torn cathedral, its stained glass shattered, its altar broken. And seated in the last pew, watching the ruin, was a robed man. Malcador. Kesselman, trained to resist even the deepest warp intrusions, did not recoil. Instead, he sat beside the man and asked, "What do I do when justice and survival are no longer the same thing?" Malcador turned to him and smiled, not kindly, not cruelly, just knowingly, and said, "Then you must choose what you want to be remembered for." When Kesselman awoke, he ordered the immediate disbandment of Ordo Cineris, an inquisitorial faction that had begun purging entire hives in the name of doctrinal purity. His career never recovered, but neither did the killings continue. On Titan, the Grey Knights felt the echo differently. Not as dreams, not as voices, but as absence. For 111 days following Malcador's death, the Librarius of Titan recorded no warp echo, no psychic bleed, no demonic distortion in their primary scrying chamber. Silence. Perfect, complete, terrifying silence. Janus, first among them, understood what it meant. Malcador had spent his final breath not screaming, but binding, sealing holes that had not yet formed, mending wounds before the blade had struck. He had bought them time, and time they knew was never free. They lit no beacon, they sang no hymn, they simply carved his sigil, an eye with a single teardrop, into the stone of the Librarius floor. It was still warm the next day. Somewhere far from Terra, on a dead world at the edge of Segmentum Obscurus, a Mechanicus explorator team once discovered a monolith buried beneath obsidian sands. It bore no writing, no design, just a smooth pillar, humming with energy that did not register on any sensor. They drilled into it. Inside, they found a single data shard, shielded in adamantium, encoded in a language that matched nothing in their archives. For 20 years, they tried to translate it, and failed. Until an Ordo Xenos archivist, upon seeing it by chance, recognized the shapes, not as words, but mathematics encoded as emotional resonances. The shard was not a message, it was a warning. A projection of what would happen if the Necrontier's stasis crypts ever fully reawakened beneath the galaxy's surface. The explorator team had no explanation. The shard predated any known encounter with the Necron race. There was only one inscription on its protective casing. They were here before us. They will not be after. Initialed with an M, and on Terra in the heart of the palace, a quiet room remains. No one speaks of it. It is said the Emperor, long silent on his throne, once turned his gaze to that room, not physically, but through the subtle shift in psychic temperature only his custodians can feel. A warming, a pause, a breath. Within that room lies nothing but dust, but the dust is arranged precisely, as if scattered by a final exhalation that had meaning. Scholars who have studied its pattern, even those who do not know what they're looking at, report strange sensations, clarity, regret, hope, not emotions, memories, as if the very atoms of that room remember the man who once stood there. And scattered throughout the Imperium are a handful of black-bound books, bound in gray leather, always blank when opened by the wrong hands. Their contents, written in shifting script, only appear to those who have reached a moment of absolute crisis, the point where they could betray everything or stand firm and lose everything. The book never gives advice. It only shows you a name, yours, and beside it, they must never know, but you must never forget. Some say it is a psychic trick, others believe the Emperor placed them. But the most ancient among the Ordo Hereticus know the truth. Malcador placed them, not to guide, to remind. The galaxy does not remember Malcador, not as it should. His statues are few, his name is rarely invoked. The High Lords of Terra mention him only when they want to sound ancient. The Adeptus Administratum files him away as Sigillite deceased. But there are some who still whisper his name in secret, not as a saint, not as a savior, but as the man who stood where no one else could and did what no one else would. He left no dynasty, he left no relic. He left only this, a path, a whisper, an echo, and in that echo a final truth. When the stars fall and the gods scream and all the lights have gone out, there will still be someone who remembers what was lost, and that will be enough to begin again. There are moments in Imperial history when a soul is spoken of not in reverence, but in hesitation, as though to say their name too loudly might awaken something old, something inconvenient. something dangerously true. Malcador is one such soul. He is remembered, if at all, in the margins. A line in a lecture on the Horus heresy, a footnote in the Archivum Imperialis, a name recited without tone by scribes who never ask what he was, only what he did. But there is a story whispered by the most ancient of the Emperor's tarot readers, a tale never written, only spoken, at the edges of candlelight, when the warp is calm and the cards fall just so. They say that once, at the very beginning of the Imperium, before the sigils and the dogma, the Emperor made a promise to Malcador, not of power, not of protection, but of light. It was in the first year of the Great Crusade. Terra had been unified, but it was still raw, scarred, still echoing with the screams of mutants dragged from the vaults of the old night. The warp was stirring, more violently than even the Emperor had predicted. And it was Malcador who stood at his side, cloaked in ash gray, fingers ink-stained from cataloging dead empires and broken sciences. One night in the highest chamber of the newly built Strategium, before it would become the Throne World's war nexus, they looked out over a silent Terra. The stars were returning. The storm walls of the warp had receded, just enough to glimpse the faintest shimmer of light piercing the darkness beyond the solar system. It was fragile, uncertain, but it was real. And in that silence, the Emperor turned to Malcador and said, "When the war is over, I will build a world of light, a world with no need of shadows, and when that day comes, you will finally rest." Malcador did not reply. He simply nodded, because he already knew. There would be no such day. Not for him. The Imperium would go on to burn through that promise. The Great Crusade became the heresy. The heresy became the long night. The long night became bureaucracy and blood and blind ritual. And in all that time, Malcador's promise remained unfulfilled. He died holding the gate. But his dream, not the Emperor's dream, but his own, never truly faded. Because Malcador had always believed not just in the Imperium, but in the idea that it could one day outgrow its pain. And in the depths of the Black Library, the real one, hidden from the gaze of mortals and gods alike, there exists a tome written in a language no demon can read. Its cover is simple, unassuming. No skulls, no fire, just gray leather. It is called The Light That Never Was, and within its pages is a map, not of stars, not of systems, but of moments. Moments where the Imperium almost changed, moments where a governor could have chosen mercy, where an inquisitor could have saved a child instead of burning a world, where a space marine could have lowered his weapon and remembered what he once was. And beside each one, Malcador's sigil. Tiny, faint, as if to say, I was there. I tried, even if they never knew. It is said that the Emperor, even now upon the throne, sees these moments, and sometimes, only sometimes, he pushes. Just a nudge, a whisper. And sometimes the soul on the edge chooses differently. Not always, not often, but enough. And when that happens, when a candle is spared, when a city is protected, when a memory is preserved instead of erased, it is said that somewhere in some chamber of the warp, Malcador smiles. There are stories from the Ordo Chronos, rare forbidden tales of ghost hours during warp storm anomalies, minutes where time fractures, where scribes find records they did not write, where voxcasters play transmissions from battles that never happened, from legions that no longer exist. In one such anomaly, an adept from Ordo Chronos Prime documented a voice transmission, scratchy, warp distorted, but unmistakably human. If you are hearing this, you're not too late. The Emperor didn't fail. He hoped, but he hoped alone. Don't make him be alone again. The message ended with 7 seconds of silence, then a name, spoken like a breath. Malcador. The record vanished the next day, but the adept kept hearing the message in his dreams. He never slept again. And then there are the children, the ones born with strange dreams, the ones who sketch circles inside circles, the ones who see the galaxy's cruelty and cry not in fear but in empathy. In the orphanages of Hive Tenebris, one such child once wrote a letter to no one in particular. He couldn't read or write, but he drew. A throne made of fire, a figure seated upon it, and beside that throne, a man in gray, smiling sadly, his eyes closed. On the back of the drawing, a single word etched into the parchment with a finger dipped in ash. Friend. There is no church of Malcador, no cathedral bearing his likeness, no crusades in his name. He is not worshipped, he is remembered by the quiet ones, the ones who clean the archives, the ones who restore old books, the ones who keep the lights on in the parts of the galaxy no one ever sees. They do not carry bolters, they do not give sermons. They simply preserve, because someone must, because someone once did. And when the stars go out, when the last cry of defiance echoes across the dark, when the Imperium breathes its last, there is a belief, never preached, never taught, only felt, that Malcador will be there, waiting in the silence, holding the ember, one last time, until the light returns. He left no dynasty, no bloodline to trace, no statues cast in gold, no temple bears his name, no saint's day honors his sacrifice. Malcador the Sigillite, the regent of Terra, the voice beside the throne, is not remembered as he should be. And yet, he is everywhere. His legacy is not in what the Imperium says, it is in what it is. After the siege of Terra ended and the walls of the palace stood scarred but unbroken, the Imperium entered what later generations would call the Age of Rebuilding. The Emperor had been interned upon the Golden Throne, neither dead nor alive, a god entombed in radiance and silence. The Primarchs were scattered, some wounded, some lost, some already fallen. And amid the rubble of broken legions, it was Malcador's works that remained. In the ash of his death, his institutions stood unshaken. Because Malcador did not build for glory, he built for endurance. The Inquisition, not the bloated paranoid web of political power it would one day become, but the original seed, a blade hidden in the dark, forged to defend humanity from itself. The first Inquisitors had no titles, no armies, only knowledge, only the will to make decisions others could not. They were the ghosts Malcador trained, survivors of Istvan, astartes broken but not bowed, psychers who had resisted corruption, mortals too dangerous to be left alone and too necessary to be cast aside. He chose them not because they were perfect, but because they knew what it meant to fail and still stand back up. Even now, 10,000 years later, every Inquisitor, no matter their path, carries a fragment of Malcador's vision, a willingness to look at horror and not flinch, a willingness to act when others debate, and above all, a willingness to choose what must be done, even at great cost. That was his gift, that was his curse. The Grey Knights, they were not his soldiers, they were his last prayer. He died before they ever took the field, before their armor shone with wards, before their swords split the skulls of demons. He never saw them kneel on demon worlds, never heard their chants echo across the Imperium. But they exist because he did. They are Malcador's soul, forged in gene seed and silence. The Emperor provided the strength. Malcador provided the shape, the context, the restraint. He taught them not how to kill, but why to resist. They are what remains of his belief that even in the darkest moments, purity was possible. Not through blindness, but through clarity, through sacrifice. And though they do not speak his name often, every strike they make in defense of mankind is his legacy. the High Lords of Terra. A mistake? A necessity? Malcador himself would have called them both. He crafted them not as tyrants, but as stabilizers, anchors for a throne that would never again be ruled by hands of flesh. He knew the Imperium would need structure, bureaucracy, permanence, and he knew it would ossify. He tried to prevent that. He structured checks. He layered redundancies. He left back doors. And most crucially, he ensured that someone always could say no. That was the true purpose of the High Lords, not to rule, but to pause the descent into chaos, to prevent the Imperium from becoming something unrecognizable. Whether they lived up to that legacy is another matter. But the system Malcador gave them, it still endures. Even now, the Silent Watchers, every generation has them. They are not a formal order. They are not on any register, but they carry a piece of Malcador's truth. Archivists who save forbidden scrolls instead of burning them. Administratum scribes who quietly erase heretical edicts before they are acted upon. Scholars who pass down the real history to one student at a time in whispers beneath the basilicas of Mars or in shadowed cloisters on Terra. They are not rebels. They are reminders that beneath the machinery of faith, beneath the dogma and fire, there was once a man who believed in understanding. His real legacy is not in structures, it is in choices. It is in every inquisitor who spares the innocent, in every gray knight who falls alone, so others may live. In every scribe who questions a line of history and chooses not to forget. It is in the flicker of resistance when a preacher dares say that maybe the emperor didn't want to be worshipped. It is in the silence before an order is given to destroy a world and the hesitation that follows. Malcador's legacy is doubt, purposeful, powerful, sacred, not weakness, humanity. In the sealed vaults beneath Terra, there is said to be one final message, encoded in a device only accessible by all three branches of imperial power: the Ecclesiarchy, the Inquisition, and the Adeptus Custodes. It is never spoken aloud, but its contents are known to a handful of souls. It says, "I do not ask that you remember me. I ask only that you remember why we built this, not for survival, but for something worth surviving for." And that is what he gave. The why, the spine, the hidden center, the quiet light beneath the gold and blood. He did not rule. He did not conquer. He carried, for centuries, until there was no more of him left to give. Malcador's legacy is not in what people say. It is in what the Imperium still dares to hope for in its quietest, most fragile moments. A day when they won't need sigillites, a day when they won't need inquisitors, or blades, or silence, a day when someone like Malcador never needs to exist again. Because his final gift was this: he did not make himself essential. He made himself temporary, so that one day mankind might not need shadows at all, and in that he became eternal.